Strange but true stories, tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. We've all had nightmares, seen things in our dream theater that frighten us, but make us thankful that those creatures or demons, or whatever they are, aren't real when we wake up. Some have even recounted having nightmares after listening to one of our episodes at night. Sorry about that. Fair warning, this story may be best listened to with the lights on in the daytime, with friends. What if the evil, lurking, hideous things from our nightmares are there when we are awake? The woman who sent us this story states that she has had many occurrences of seeing supernatural and paranormal things in her lifetime, but none quite as frightening as this one that we are calling CRISPR. Growing up, I was always aware of supernatural things. The women in my family are very sensitive to it. We are always aware when we aren't really alone. The men in my family have never noticed anything out of the ordinary, as far as I can tell. At least, whenever I asked my male cousins and uncles about it, they told me that I'm just seeing things and ghosts aren't real. I've had many things happen in my life. There was a ghost that would purposefully scare my sister and me when we misbehaved. And there are paranormal things that happened that I can't really explain. Honestly, I could write a book about all of the things I have experienced. But the story I'm about to tell you, I'm not sure I would include it in that book. It's 100% true, but just remembering it gives me tremendous anxiety. It is the scariest thing to ever happen to me, but I will do my best to not leave any detail out. I was 17 years old at the time. This particular night, I was on the phone with a friend of mine. We were up really late. It was like 1:30 in the morning. We were just BSing about complete nonsense, nothing different than what normal teenage girls do today. I lived in a fairly small house, but it had an open layout. It was about the size of a 2-bedroom apartment. We had a living room that bled over into the dining room. Between the dining room and the living room was a door frame that led to the kitchen. Off the kitchen was my mother's bedroom. To the right, between the living room and dining room, was a space with barely enough room to fit a linen closet and 2 doors, one which led to the bathroom and one that led to mine and my sister's room. So my friend and I were just talking and carrying on when I looked up and noticed someone or something peeking at me from behind the wall in the kitchen, and I froze. For a second, I thought I was seeing things. It noticed me and quickly ducked into the kitchen. Very quietly, I told my friend that someone was in the house. She laughed it off and made a joke about how I was going to be the headline in tomorrow's newspaper. I immediately said, "No, I'm serious. Be ready to call the cops. I'm going to check it out." At this point, she became serious and said if she heard anything, she was prepared to call 911. Very slowly, I made my way to the opening. The lights were off in the kitchen, but there was enough light from other rooms that I could see a little bit. When I reached the frame and looked into the kitchen, I saw... I don't even know how to describe it, really. It was a man, I think. He was completely black, like he had been burned to a crisp, with bandages all over his body. Some of the bandages were hanging off. They looked really old and tattered. He was hunched over, facing the wall, and I was completely frozen in fear. It turned to me, and it took everything in me not to scream. It had no eyes, 2 black holes where they should have been. Its mouth was open, and the teeth that he had were noticeably yellow. We stared at each other for a second, maybe 2. Then it lunged at me. My reaction was to turn on the kitchen light, and when I did, it was gone. Now, again, you have to understand that my family and I have seen ghosts. It's not uncommon for us. I mean, seeing a burned to the crisp man in your kitchen is pretty freaky, and I was scared. And I'm not sure what I would have done if it had still been there when the light came on, but I'm just letting you know how I acted as calmly as I did when I saw this frightening thing. Hey, are you okay? My friend asked, still hanging on the phone with me. I took a seat at my kitchen table and assured my friend I was okay. Just ghosties doing their ghost business, I guess, I told her. She responded that I needed to get more sleep. She wasn't wrong. I did have serious insomnia during those days. I told her that she didn't need to worry, that there wasn't anyone physically in the house, and I was going to take her advice and go to bed. We said goodnight to each other and we hung up, promising to talk again in the morning. I walked back to my bedroom. After a few moments, I heard a sound coming from the kitchen. It sounded like nails on the tile. Do you know that sound when a dog walks on hardwood floors? It sounded just like that. We had a dog, so this didn't scare me because I thought it was my dog walking in the kitchen. She liked to sleep with my mother, but would squeeze through the crack in the door and roam the house occasionally. After the fright I just had, I wanted the dog with me, so I got up to retrieve her from the kitchen. To this day, I wish I would not have done that. Because it wasn't my dog in the kitchen. Instead, I saw the burned, bandaged creature crawling around the floor, like a spider. Its arms were bent opposite of how they should have. Its knees were doing the same thing. It crawled up and down the small path in our kitchen. When it noticed me, it stopped. Its head stayed down, facing the floor, but it adjusted its body to face me. I immediately ran into my mom's room and jumped on her bed. It woke her up with a fright, and she demanded to know what was wrong. I had no idea how to explain what I had seen to her, so I just said that I had a nightmare and asked her if I could sleep with her that night. She agreed and almost immediately fell back asleep. But I could still hear it crawling around in the kitchen. The bedroom door was still open from me having flung it wide when I rushed in. I looked through the open door, and I could see it, doing circles in the kitchen, just spinning in a single spot. Then it began to crawl towards me. I threw the blankets over my head, and I began reciting the Lord's Prayer over and over again, squeezing my eyes shut. I felt it crawl onto the bed. I felt its weight on my legs. I felt its weight on my chest. It stayed on my chest for 2 chants of the Lord's Prayer, and then it vanished. Or at least I couldn't feel the pressure anymore. But I could hear it crawling around in the kitchen again. Then it made its way back into my mother's room, onto her bed, and crawl right back on my chest again. I have never been so scared in my entire life. My grandmother and mother always said that when you're afraid, to call upon the Lord, and He will protect you. I believed that He was there protecting me as I said the Lord's Prayer. Perhaps something worse would have happened if I hadn't been praying. I'll never know. Whatever this thing was, it was strong enough to manifest itself into something physical, or at least allow me to acknowledge that it could touch me. I really can't answer how I was able to keep my wits for so long, feeling it and hearing it, the way it taunted me, because I do believe that is what it was doing as it rested on my chest, only to disappear back into the kitchen and repeat itself. I was just glued there, blankets over my head, eyes squeezed shut, and trying with all my might to focus only on praying. I absolutely felt threatened the entire time this was going on. You know that feeling you get when you do a loop on a roller coaster? How your heart flips, your stomach knots, and for a single moment, the only thing you can focus on is your mortality and how easy it would be for the belt to break or the clamps to unlock. That adrenaline you get when, the moment after you cleared that loop, you feel as if you defied everything, and anything is possible. Now, imagine all of those feelings mixed together, but the moment ticks on with no end. That is how I felt. That is how I still feel with this memory. Do I believe it could have hurt me? Definitely. Why didn't it hurt me? I don't know. Maybe it took more pleasure in my fear than it would in my pain. This continued for the rest of the night. It felt like an eternity, but in reality it was probably about 2 hours before the sun began to rise. Once the sun was up, I flew out of the house, still in my PJs, and made my way to my grandmother's house. She was an extremely early riser, and I knew she'd be awake. Once I got there, I told her everything that happened. I was crying and shaking, just a complete mess. She did her best to calm me down and said that we needed our house to be blessed and offered to do a few prayers in the house. She did say the prayers and walked through the house. We went to church and got some holy water, and she told me to keep it within reach of me every time I went to bed. I never saw that creature again, but sometimes I would get the sense that it was watching me. It was rare, but when that did happen, I would leave the house and spend the night somewhere else. I never wanted to experience anything like that ever again. Besides this being extremely traumatizing, what confused me the most was my mother couldn't sense it. My grandmother could. She told me right away she could feel it when she walked in the house. But my mother insisted that there was nothing in the house. It was as if she was locked out of everything that was going on. Even when the sun rose and I flew out of the house to my grandmother's, she didn't move, just continued to sleep. I've tried to do research on this thing I saw, but have come up empty-handed. I know I can't be the only person who has seen this creature or experienced things it can do. My biggest hope is that I can find someone who may be able to shed some light on this whole thing. I am now 31 years old, but this has never left me. I do my best not to think about it, but when it flutters back to the surface of my mind, I experience that night as if it were the first time. It still scares me. This has been another strange but true story. Can you help this woman out? Have you ever experienced anything similar to what she's described? Let us know by sending us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. We will pass along any information we receive to her to aid in her understanding that she isn't the only one who has witnessed something like this. Thanks for watching this episode. I'm Steve White. Until next time.